Welcome to our National Sheep Improvement Program webinar. My name is Brenda Rowe. I serve as the Suffolk representative on the NSIP Board of Directors, and I'll be serving as the moderator for our program this evening. We are excited to be able to cover two topics this evening. The first one is really just talking about the technology of quantitative genetics and how to use estimated breeding values. The National Sheep Improvement Program has been around in the United States about 35 years. And so the technology has been available, and it certainly has advanced significantly since the beginning of the program. But we do find that unlike some of the other species in the livestock industry, the sheep industry still is not up to speed in utilizing some of the marvelous tools that are available for genetic selection. So that will be the focus of the first segment of our program this evening. And Dr. Tom Murphy, who is a research geneticist at the USDA Meat Animal Research Center in Clay, Nebraska, will be our speaker this evening to try and give you a good feel for what EBVs are and how you can utilize EBVs in your breeding program. And then that will be followed by a little tutorial from Becky Drlik. And Becky works with Willoughby Livestock Sales. And Becky is one of the wizards of online sales. And she is going to offer some tips to help you be able to navigate. There are two sales where that NSIP is sponsoring, where you will be able to purchase sheep with estimated breeding values. And so Becky will offer some tips for both the online sale as well as the live sale, how to bid online. Because that may be a new experience for some of you. Willoughby Livestock Sales has been in the business of online sales for many years and has been very successful at it. So we're pleased to have them partnering with us this year on the NSIP sales. So we'll go ahead and get to the first segment of our program, and we will turn the program over to Tom Murphy. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Thanks, Brenda. Can everyone see my screen? All right, well, like Brenda said, my name's Tom Murphy, and I'm a sheep geneticist with the USDA at the Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska. Over the past 15 months or so, I've given a lot of webinars, not as many as others, but I've given presentations like this, kind of the nuts and bolts of what EBVs are and how we can use them. So if you've tuned into any of those, I apologize. There's probably a lot of repeated information here, but if you're anything like me, it usually takes a few times before you really learn something. So that's what we'll be focusing on tonight.
And if you do have questions, Tom, let me interrupt you just a minute. I should have said before I introduced you, if you have any questions, if you click on your toolbar across the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat box. Click on that. You can type your question in the chat box, and then I will feed your questions to the presenters. So go ahead, Tom.
Sounds good. All right. So to begin here, anytime we want to talk about how we accurately identify genetically superior animals, it's best to begin with what we refer to as the basic genetic model in genetics. And this model tells us that an individual's phenotype, or their performance for a trait that we can see or measure, is a combination of the gene variants that they carry, which affect their performance, along with the environment that they perform in. And we refer to the heritable component of an individual's genetic makeup as their breeding value. And all other factors that can impact performance can be considered non-genetic environmental effects. So For example, this polypay ram's phenotype for weaning weight may have been 62 pounds, but we know that not all lambs weigh 62 pounds at weaning. And part of the reason this ram may have weighed more or less than others is due to his breeding value or his genetic merit for weaning weight. But it's also partly due to non-genetic factors that impact weaning weight, such as how old he was at weaning, how old his dam was, and how much milk she was producing, whether he was born or raised as a single or twin or triplet, and everything else, non-genetic, all of which kind of creates a haze around his performance that limits our ability to see what his actual genetic merit is. So an important concept that you hear us talk about in genetics is heritability. And heritability is a population measure, and it's calculated as the proportion of variation or differences in performance that we see that's attributable to differences in breeding value or genetics between animals. So this is a correct mathematical expression of heritability, but it doesn't really give you a lot of intuition on why heritability is important for us and how we can use it in genetic improvement. The heritability for a trait can range from 0 to 1. It's just a number. And what it really does is it serves as an indicator as the amount of strength of the relationship between an individual's performance for a trait and their breeding value or their genetic merit for the trait. So another equally true definition of heritability is that it measures the degree to which the performance of a parent will resemble the performance of their offspring. So in this table, I've listed some typical heritabilities for economically important traits on your sheep operations. We have low heritable traits like lamb survival and number of lambs born. Our most highly heritable traits are typically those associated with fiber production in sheep. And so these would be like grease fleece weight or average fiber diameter. Other economically important traits like lamb weaning weight or ultrasound loin depth are more moderately heritable. So these differences in heritabilities across traits tells us that not all traits are created equally in terms of their genetic architecture. In particular, for lowly heritable fitness traits, this means that an individual's performance for the trait doesn't really reflect their true genetic merit for the trait very well all the time. And an individual's performance for the trait won't necessarily reflect their progeny's performance for the trait very well. So as an example, survival or fertility, again, these are lowly heritable traits, but every ram or every ewe that you've ever purchased survived as a lamb, and they had 2 parents that were fertile. But that doesn't mean that all of their lambs will survive or all of their daughters will be fertile and prolific. These traits have a low heritability because, again, they're largely affected by those non-genetic environmental factors that are difficult or can be difficult to tease out when we're just visually appraising these animals. So we kind of broadly defined breeding value as an animal's genetic merit for a trait. But a true breeding value is defined as the sum of all of the independent effects of all of the gene variants an animal carries, which can impact their phenotype. If we imagine being able to peer into this ram's genome and ride along his DNA, every time we encounter a gene that impacts, in this case, weaning weight, we'd take a note and say what the effect of that gene variant was, and then we could add up all of those gene variants across the genome. That's what his breeding value would be. If we were able to do this, we'd notice a few things. First, gene variants can have both positive and negative effects on performance. Some of them increase weaning weight, some of them decrease weaning weight. And secondly, most of our production traits that we're concerned with aren't just impacted by a couple of genes. They're impacted by hundreds, thousands or even more genes. And then finally, most genes have really small effects on performance by themselves. In this example, we might see that each gene variant only positively or negatively impacted weaning weight by 1/100th of a pound. But when we add all of them up across the entire genome, we can see pretty large differences in breeding value or genetic merit between animals. So overall, this ram had more favorable gene variants than unfavorable, and that resulted in a breeding value for weaning weight of positive 4 pounds, or he had the genetic merit to weigh 4 pounds above, in this case, the average polypay at weaning. But unfortunately, we don't actually know all of the genes that can impact performance for a particular trait, and we don't know all of their independent effects. This means we'll never actually know an animal's true breeding value, but just like anything that we don't know with absolute certainty, we can predict or try to estimate it. And in the case of breeding values, we refer to these as estimated breeding values, or EBVs. In NSIP and all other livestock genetic evaluation programs, we calculate EBVs using the phenotypes that we record on individuals and their genetic relatives. But for all predictions, accuracy matters. And how accurate we are at predicting an animal's genetic merit from performance records depends on a few things, including the number of records that went into our prediction, as well as the heritability of the trait. So ultimately, an animal's EBV for a trait tells us their genetic worth as a parent. So the best estimate of breeding value would be if we randomly mated 2 or more rams to a really large group of ewes, and then evaluated where their progeny perform relative to one another and relative to the rest of the breed. Again, we'll consider weaning weight, but we could do this for any trait. We take the average of each ram's lamb weaning weight, and we see that lambs from ram 1 on the left were 3/4 of a pound below the breed average, and lambs from ram 2 on the right were 1.5 pounds above the breed average. Since each parent transmits half of their genes to their progeny, we'd multiply these numbers by 2 and conclude that ram 1's EBV for weaning weight is negative 1.5 pounds, and ram 2's EBV for weaning weight is positive 3 pounds. When doing this, the accuracy of each ram's EBV would depend on how many lambs were evaluated and what the trait's heritability was. And the equation we'd use to calculate EBVs in this example isn't really important for you to remember, but just gives you an idea of how EBV accuracy changes with the amount of information we have. So with 25 lambs evaluated per ram, the accuracy of that ram's EBV is pretty good at 75% accuracy. 85% accuracy if we had 50 lambs per ram, and so on. And it would take us over 620 lambs per ram if we wanted our EBV accuracy to be 99%. So unfortunately, few people have the resources to conduct such large-scale progeny tests on every single ram prospect they have. And this wouldn't be biologically possible to do for ewes because they can't have this many lambs in their lifetime. Furthermore, we really don't want to generate a bunch of poor performing lambs from a ram just to determine that he's got poor genetic merit. But fortunately, we can still calculate EBVs on animals that don't have any progeny. And we do this by considering the individual's performance and the performance of their genetic relatives up to the point of evaluation. So this is an important point to make. I've been involved with NSIP for several years, though not nearly as long as some people have. But I've still heard a lot of negative perceptions of it from sheep producers around the country. Ultimately, they feel that a number or an EBV can't tell them how an animal's progeny are expected to perform, or they're a bit leery of them. So when you ask these people, well, then how do they select replacement animals? They usually tell you they use a combination of visual appraisal and maybe a few performance records on them. But what they usually don't realize is that anytime they use phenotypes or performance to infer an individual's genetic merit for a trait, they are also estimating that individual's breeding value. They might not realize it, but that's what they're doing. So they might say, that's the growthiest ewe lamb of the bunch. She should be genetically superior for weaning weight than those slower growing ewe lambs. We are using that ewe lamb's performance to infer her genetic merit. We might also say, well, that ram lamb was born as a single. He should be genetically inferior for number of lambs born than those twin ram lambs. Again, we're using the performance of this ram's dam to infer his genetic merit. It's an estimated breeding value. The problem is when we only use an individual's performance to estimate their breeding value, and if we don't do a good job at accounting for all of those non-genetic effects, our resulting EBVs can be very inaccurate. And we might try our best to correct for some of these non-genetic effects, or consider other sources of information when we're assessing replacement animals. So we might say, well, this was my fastest growing ewe lamb, but her full sister was just middle of the road. Here we're using additional information on a genetic relative to further guide our selection. Or we might say this ram lamb was born a single, but his mother was just a ewe lamb or a yearling, as an attempt to correct for the non-genetic effect of dam age on number of lambs born. In the calculation of NSIP EBVs, we're much more systematic. First, these individual phenotypes are adjusted for most of the non-genetic effects we can account for, like the sex of lamb, their birth and rearing type, or the physical contemporary group that they were reared in. And this puts everyone on a level playing field. Then when we go and calculate an individual's EBV, we aren't just considering their performance, we're going to consider the performance of all of their genetic relatives because they share genes in common. So in calculating an individual's NSIP EBV, records from their genetic relatives are essentially weighted by how closely related they are. So records from a close genetic relative like a full sibling or a parent would be more influential on an individual's EBV than records from more genetically distant relatives like an uncle or a cousin, but they all go into the equation. When we do this, NSIP EBV provide a much more accurate assessment of an individual's genetic merit than we can get from just visual appraisal or considering single performance records alone. So to demonstrate this, on the left, we're going to evaluate this ram for his genetic merit for number of lambs born, his weaning weight and fecal egg count, and we're just going to consider his performance. So we see that he was born a twin. We might imagine he should be carrying genes that increase lambing rate, but this wasn't his phenotype, this was his dam's phenotype. And number of lambs born is a lowly heritable trait. So this combines to give us a really low accuracy for our estimated breeding value for lambing rate of just 16% when we're just considering his birth type to infer his genetic merit for number of lambs born. For more moderately heritable traits like weaning weight or fecal egg count, we see that just considering this ram lamb's performance, those traits serve as a somewhat decent indicator of genetic merit with accuracies of 45 to 50%, but we can do better. So on the right, we're depicting the information that might go into an NSIP EBV. And we've got the same ram lamb, and he's got the same performance, but we're not just going to consider his performance, we're going to include the performance of all of his genetic relatives that we have available to us. And when we do this, we vastly improve our accuracies, most notably for lowly heritable traits. And these are real accuracies from real Katahdin NSIP ram lambs born in 2020 that have no progeny records yet. So for number of lambs born, we get accuracies ranging from 36 to 50%, which is much higher than just considering birth type over there on the left. We still see improved accuracies for our more moderately heritable traits as well. And in NSIP, we've got ram lambs with EBV accuracies of nearly 75% for fecal egg count because of the extensive pedigree and performance recording that's taken place over the years. So the accuracy of NSIP EBVs will only get higher as more data is added to the system, particularly as these rams start to have progeny of their own. And accuracy of NSIP EBVs will also increase in the future as we start to incorporate other technologies like genomics. But no matter how good we think we are at visually evaluating animals on the left there with a single piece of information, our EBVs will never get higher than they are on the left. So if we're a profit-driven sheep producer, we should be using NSIP EBVs in our selection of breeding values, again, because they're far more accurate indicators of genetic merit than just visual appraisal or single performance records. But how do we actually use these EBVs in practice? Again, an EBV is just a number indicating the genetic merit of an individual for a trait relative to the rest of the sheep of their breed enrolled in NSIP. So we've got a polypay ram here, and we see his EBV for weaning weight is 1.58 kilograms, for fecal egg count is negative 21%, and for number of lambs weaned is 36%. So that's great, but we need some perspective on the whole population before we can really assign any worth to these numbers. And we gain that perspective by visiting NSIP's website and looking up the percentile reports for a particular breed, which tells us where an animal's EBV ranks relative to the most recent generation of their breed. So if we did this for our polypays, we'd see that this ram is about average relative to other NSIP polypays for weaning weight. He's below average for fecal egg count, and he's far above average for number of lambs weaned. So an important point here is the direction that we want to take our flock's performance. If we want to increase the trait's value in your flock, you find animals with a more positive EBV. And if you want to decrease the trait's value in your flock, you find animals with a more negative EBV or a smaller EBV. Since larger weaning weights and greater number of lambs weaned are generally more favorable, EBVs with more positive values are more favorable to most. But for a trait like fecal egg count that we generally want to decrease if we run on pasture, EBVs with more negative values are more favorable because we want to decrease them. So usually at ram sales, we're considering more than one animal at a time. And if we didn't have access to those breed percentile reports for some reason, we can compare two or more animals by just calculating the difference between their estimated breeding values for each trait. So to compare these two Katahdin rams for weaning weight, 3.22 kilograms minus 1.8 kilograms of between the ram on the left and the right, we'd say that ram 1, we expect him to carry a set of genes that make him 1.42 kilograms heavier than ram 2, or the difference between those two EBVs. And similarly for fecal egg count and number of lambs weaned, we just take the difference between their EBVs and we say we also expect ram 1 to carry a set of genes to give him an 87% lower fecal egg count and a 10% greater lamb crop at weaning than ram 2. Okay, so just take the difference between the two EBVs. But these rams have already performed for weaning weight and for weaning fecal egg count, and they're never going to perform for a sex-limited trait like number of lambs weaned. So EBVs are really best used prospectively and in regard to their future progeny performance. So let's pretend we randomly mate these two rams to a group of ewes and look at their lamb crop. Since these rams are going to transmit half of their genes to their lambs, they're also going to transmit half of their EBVs to their lambs. So again, we'll just take the difference in EBVs between the two rams and divide by 2. And we'd say that lambs from ram 1 are we'd expect them to be 0.7 kilograms heavier at weaning and to have a 43% lower fecal egg count than lambs from ram 2. And if we kept replacement ewe lambs out of these two rams, we'd expect daughters from ram 1 to have a 5% greater lamb crop at weaning than daughters from ram 2. So comparing expected progeny performance between two rams also lets us assign a relative value to them, which is particularly useful when you'll all be bidding on animals at auction. So how much more are you willing to spend on one ram over another? So here's a simple example on how you can address that. We expect lambs from ram 1 again to weigh on average 0.7 kilograms heavier at weaning than lambs from ram 2. And we could do a simple back of the envelope calculation and say, we're going to assume we breed each ram to 30 ewes. Each ewe weans 1.6 lambs, and we're going to use these rams for 3 years. Over the course of their breeding life, we'd expect to market over 100 kilograms or 225 pounds more lamb from ram 1 than ram 2, which equates to over $400 if you're selling at $1.80 a pound, or more if you're selling at today's lamb prices. So in this example, we could afford to spend $400 more on ram 1 than ram 2. So currently, NSIP provides EBVs for about 18 different traits associated with body weight at different ages, ultrasound body composition like loin muscle depth and back fat, internal parasite resistance, and reproductive traits like number of lambs born or number of lambs weaned. So this really helps us refine our selection decisions. But with this many different traits and all these different numbers, it can be a bit overwhelming to first-time NSIP buyers. And that's really where multiple trait indexes come in handy. So as you all know, we usually want to improve the performance for more than one trait at a time. We want to increase number of lambs we wean, increase individual lamb weaning weight, improve their internal parasite tolerance, and maybe improve carcass characteristics. So selecting for multiple traits at the same time is made a lot easier by multiple trait selection indexes that were developed within NSIP and other places. And these indexes are comprised of individual trait EBVs that we then put certain weights on according to their economic or biological importance. So one index that we use for terminal sheep in NSIP is the Carcass Plus Index, which attempts to identify an individual's lean carcass growth. It puts a positive weighting on weaning and post-weaning body weight to improve lamb growth. It puts a positive weight on loin muscle depth to increase muscling, and it puts a negative weight on back fat depth to reduce carcass fat. So if you're looking for terminal rams, this would be a good one-stop multiple trait selection index to consider. And then another important index for seed stock producers of maternal breeds, or if you're a commercial producer looking to generate replacement ewe lambs, the US Maternal Index. It was developed to essentially assess total weight of lamb weaned per ewe. So it does this by putting a large positive weight on number of lambs weaned, smaller positive weights on lamb weaning weight and maternal weaning weight, which is an indicator of maternal ability and milk production of ewes. And then it actually puts a small negative weight on number of lambs born. And it does this because we don't just want ewes to give birth to more lambs, we want them to be able to rear them. So a ewe that gives birth to twins and rears both of them is going to be more favorable overall than a ewe that gives birth to triplets and only rears 2 lambs. So to wrap things up, EBVs calculated by the National Sheep Improvement Program are the most effective, accurate method of selecting replacement animals that we have in the United States. As such, using NSIP EBVs should really be our standard operating procedure for all levels of the profit-driven sectors of the U.S. sheep industry, whether you're a seed stock producer or a commercial producer. We aren't just numbers chasers in NSIPs, we are profit chasers. So there's a really good worksheet that Rusty and others put together called the NSIP RAM Buyer's Guide that you can find on NSIP's website. This will give you more details on how you can set flock goals and prioritize traits for improvement in your flock and help you identify the right animals to reach your goal. Remember that genetic improvement is a long game. We can't expect to immediately improve our flocks by just buying genetically improved rams. But what we do now will impact our flocks for years down the road. So persistency is key when we're selecting animals based on their EBVs. An important point is to only compare EBVs between animals of the same breed. Currently, we don't have a crossbreed adjustment factors for NSIP EBVs like we have available in beef cattle. So you can't directly compare the weaning weight EBV of a polypay ram to the weaning weight EBV of a Suffolk ram. They're on different scales that we can't compare. But on that point, it's still important to crossbreed and use common sense when we're selecting rams. If your primary objective is to improve market lamb growth and carcass characteristics, you're still better off buying a terminal ram based on his EBVs for growth and carcass characteristics than going out and finding the highest growth maternal breed ram. Likewise, if you're using a terminal breed for crossbreeding, you really shouldn't care about their EBVs for maternal traits because you aren't keeping ewe lambs out of them. That's what our maternal breeds are for. So don't fall back into old habits of visual appraisal for performance traits. It's important to still have structural soundness in our breeding animals. We need to make sure they've got good mouths on them. We need to continue to conduct breeding soundness exams in our rams. But remember that you or I cannot account for all of the environmental effects that contributed to an animal's performance up until that point. So sometimes EBVs don't line up with what you think you see visually. You're going to see animals that were born as a single, but they have a higher EBV for number of lambs born than an animal born as a twin. It might be due to differences in dam age between those animals, as well as different husbandry practices going back to that source flock. Similarly, you're going to see animals that appear growthier than others, but have a lower EBV for weaning weight than others. Again, we can account for the genetic or non-genetic effects that influence performance in NSIP, but we can't always account for those when we're just visually appraising animals. So it's important to trust the numbers. They've accounted for those non-genetic effects that influence an animal's performance. And finally, we've never claimed that NSIP EBVs are the cure to every sheep producer's ailments. EBVs are an important tool, but they aren't our only tool. We can't breed ourselves out of poor management. So always stay on top of your nutrition, vaccination programs, and overall husbandry to really fully realize the genetic potential of our improved animals. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. If you have questions at a later time, here's my contact information. I'm best reached by email at this point. But yeah, if you have any questions, let me know.
There, I had to unmute. Tom, we've had a question come in, and I would encourage any of the rest of you who have a question, again, go down to the bottom of your screen, click on your toolbar on the chat box, and type in your question. So here's a question, Tom. You had mentioned we want to move certain traits in certain directions, but is bigger or more extreme always better? If a producer has limited resources for their flock, is a moderate EBV better than an extreme? Talk about the decision-making that people might want to consider.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. You know, a lot of times I've heard people talk poorly about NSIP or EBVs in general and say, well, look what EPDs have done in the beef cattle industry, meaning they've made tremendous progress on increasing the amount of beef we produce on lower number of a national cow inventory. And as a result, we tend to have larger cows than we did 50 years ago. But that's not because EPDs did that. That's because they used EPDs to get to get them towards that direction. So you always want to consider what direction you want to go. Not everybody needs a 200% lamb crop. Not everybody needs 150% lamb crop. But what EBVs allow you to do is find those animals that are expected to perform at various parts of that genetic spectrum. So you can find animals that are more moderate in number of lambs born or decreased number of lambs born. You can find animals that are more moderate in weaning weight, or you can find them that are extreme in weaning weight. So it's always important to first know where your performance is at, what your breeding objectives are, what your market calls for to find those animals. And NSIP breeders can really help out in terms of providing rams from all of those different genetic spectrums to tailor to specific operations. And that Rams buyer guide that I mentioned goes into that detail as well.
Tom, here's another question. Is it better to try to move all traits at one time, or should I focus on moving one or two traits at a time?
Yeah, as you try to move more and more traits at the same time, you make less progress in individual traits. So it's best to focus on a handful of traits, maybe 3 or 4 rather than 10, or 1 or 2, depending on what traits you want to improve. So in those indexes, those are really geared at focusing on really the traits that matter to improve pounds of lamb weaned in the case of the maternal index, or really the traits that matter to improve carcass characteristics in the case of the terminal sire index. So it depends on where your performance is and what traits you want to improve. But yeah, in general, focusing in on, say, 3 or 4 traits at a time is better than trying to select for everything under the sun at once, because you're going to make slower genetic improvement as you add more and more traits in there.
It doesn't appear that I am seeing any more questions coming into the chat. As Tom said, he is available to answer any questions. His contact information is there. You may also contact Rusty Burgett, our Executive Director of NSIP, and his information for contact is on the NSIP website. So we will move to the next component of our program and hear from Becky Drlik from Willoughby Sales. And Becky is going to give us some tips on navigating the 2 NSIP sales, where if you are interested in purchasing sheep with EBVs, these sheep will be offered in both the online sales starting next week and then the live Center of the Nation sale, which will have online bidding available, and that will be the last Saturday in the month. So we will turn it over to Becky, and she will help you figure out how you might navigate purchasing sheep online.
Thanks, Brenda. I appreciate you asking me back again. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Hopefully you can all see that. As you said, I'm Becky Drlik. I work with Willoughby Sales. I have been with them now for over 7 years. I work in the online platform, live auction platform. Brenda graciously called me a wizard. I don't know if that's true or not, but if I don't know the answer, I can quickly find it. So I just want to walk through, I'm going to see how I can get rid of this. There we go. How to get logged in, get registered. I'm going to just go step by step through the online buying and then step by step on the live auction buying that you can bid. If you're not at the event, you can bid from the comforts of your home. So I will start with, if you are new to W Livestock, you will just log in to wlivestock.com. You'll go there first. You will either log in if you already have information. If not, we'll need you to register. And it's just filling out some information here. And then there's a couple other steps once you get all this information filled out. Agree to the terms and conditions, fill that out. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And then once you get to here, you'll need to go through a couple of things here. Notifications, it is advisable to get outbid notification via text messaging. So if you happen to step away from your computer, if you do get outbid, it'll send you a text with the link so that you can bid right from your phone. And billing and payment, we will need a credit card on file. That is part of the verification so that we know you're a real person. You can choose for us to run the credit card after the sale. We will not run it unless you ask us to, or you default in payment. Couple security reasons there. So once you get all that information filled out, you are ready to bid. You'll go to the W Livestock homepage. And by the time you're ready to bid, it will be up here under auctions open for bidding. But right now we'll scroll down and you'll see all the upcoming sales down here. So depending on which sale you want to purchase in, you'll click into that banner and you'll see the catalog. There's a couple ways that will make it easier. You see this little eyeball right here. You can create a watch list within all of the NSIP sales, and then you can go to your watch list over here on the side. And then there'll be, I've got several in here. So then you could just bid straight from the watch list instead of scrolling through each sale. You'll just have them all gathered here on your watch list. I created a demo just to show you the bidding process. Should be open now. You will have to answer a couple of questions before you place your bid. You'll have to agree to you're over 18. Payment method. On W Livestock, we give you an option that is check within 7 days, an electronic check within 7 days, or we can run your credit card immediately following the sale. When in doubt, send a check within 7 days. You can always opt to do the other ones. The other one is post-sale contact. We can either call you or email you. And again, this is the demo site. You agree, and then it will say, are you sure you want to place this bid? So it asks you twice if you want to place the bid. Click it, and now it says you are winning. I can go in. If you get outbid, this will turn red and it will say you have been outbid so that you can place another bid. I'm going to show you how to place a max bid. So the first bid is $500 and you have a budget. You're going to max bid it at $1,000. You do not have to answer those questions again. That's just a one-time thing. And then you place your bid. You are winning. So you can see that nobody on this front side knows that you have placed a max bid. So the computer will bid on your behalf. If it extends that $1,000, then you will get that red you have been outbid right here that shows up. And that's the online bidding. Key here, is to go ahead and make sure that you get the outbid notification via text messaging when you fill out your profile, if you have not already. And then always there's somebody on call if you have any questions or something doesn't seem right to you, just make sure that you give us a call in the office. And that is the online bidding part. So with the live one, it's going to look a little bit different. Let me get here. You'll scroll down. It shows the live sale here. And it does not have where you can add to your watch list. You're going to be needing to watch this one, obviously. When you click in the banner, you see the catalog first. The day of the sale, you'll want to click this blue view ring right here. And obviously there's nothing, and this is where you'll then agree to the terms and conditions here. When you're watching it, you can, the live stream will be here and there'll be the video of the live animal on the block. Those that have pictures, the picture will show up here. And then you can view from just the comments and the information that they put on there are the ways that you can do it. And again, I made a demo of bidding on the live one here. So bear with me while I get this ready.
Becky, while you're navigating that, there was a question that came in. What if someone else has the same exact max bid as you do?
The person that put the max bid in first ultimately will be the winner of the max bid when it gets to that, like if it was that $1,000, the person that put that $1,000 in first wins that amount. So then the person that put it in second will have to bid higher than that.
But they would be notified that they were outbid at their
Yes.
max bid, and then
Correct.
they could come in and
Correct.
do an additional bidding. So
Yes.
you're never totally locked into, if you put a max bid in, that's not the end of the road. If you see how the sale is going and you want to come in and place a higher bid, you still have the opportunity to do that, correct?
Correct. And that's where I feel like the outbid notification comes in really handy, because a lot of times in many of our sales, people will put a max bid in probably early in the day and then go to work or walk away from their computer. And then that way they get that outbid notification. If they do get outbid, they'll get it and can come right back and bid if they choose to after that. Okay. Any more questions on the online part? We can save them for the end too. So I'm going to place a lot on the block here. As you can see, the bid $500 comes up. This one, again, is a little bit different. You have to double click and it will say you have offered $500. The clerk at the auction has to accept your bid, which I'll do that. So now it says you are winning right here. If you get outbid, your bid button will come back. And I recommend, highly, highly recommend, you have to pretty speedy, you know, everybody's got different internet. Some are slow, some are fast. This bid screen is always on and you just have to come in pretty quick here because they're taking bids live and they're taking bids online. Typically the ones at the event are seen first from the auctioneers. So you have to just really make sure that you stay with it. And again, like I said, you can watch and the audio will be playing as well with the auctioneer.
So people will actually see the animal that they are bidding on.
Yes.
Will be coming across the block at that time live.
Correct. It will be live. If you're new to the online with the live, sometimes the auctioneer, you're busy watching the bid screen, you're trying to listen to the auctioneer. This is where I can't emphasize enough. This bid screen is always correct. If you're hearing the auctioneer and he, you know, it's streaming, so there could be a 1 second delay. My advice to that would be, if you're getting kind of mixed up with that, is turn the sound off on your computer and just follow the bid screen.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. that maybe is like the biggest question or concern that we have. You know, people are like, well, the auctioneer was a second behind and I didn't know what to do. The bid screen, just
Yeah, the
follow
most
that.
up to date is right in front of you then.
Correct. Yes. Yep. And that's it. And if you're winning the bidder, it'll be the same as the other one. It will say you are winning bidder. And if it's sold, you'll get, you have won this item at the end of it. So I think that's all I got there. Again, couple tidbits on the online part. Turn on your notifications so that if you get outbid and you're not sitting at your computer, you can bid from your phone. If you choose to do a max bid, once you are outbid from that, you'll be notified of that as well. The live auction, I can't emphasize enough, double click your bid. It's a double click, not just a single click. Again, a couple of people, and that's just again, a safety feature for us that, you know, your 2-year-old son isn't up there playing with your computer and accidentally bids a couple $1,000s for you. And then bid fast. And if you're having trouble listening and following the bid screen, just mute the audio and follow what's on your screen. And I think that covers all of those. Anything else I can answer?
I don't see any other questions coming in the chat. And if someone thinks of a question afterwards, they can always go to the Willoughby site and either email or call. And I know your staff is always very, very good at trying to help people navigate the system and feel comfortable.
Yep. And like I said, the day of the sale, there is always somebody on call. So like she said, go to wlivestock.com. Let me find under auction info. There's a whole list of phone numbers for you to call that you can get a hold of any one of us during the day. So happy to answer any questions ahead of time or the day of the sale if you're having any trouble. We're happy to help you out.
Okay, thanks, Becky. We look forward to working with you on both of these sales.
Thank you. And again, reach out if you have any questions.
Well, that concludes our program for this evening. It doesn't appear as though there are any additional questions coming into the chat. So we hope that you have found this information to be useful. I have been involved with the National Sheep Improvement Program for over 20 years with our Suffolk flock. And I'm just really passionate about the program, about utilizing estimated breeding values and you know, what it really can do for your flock. So those of you who are maybe on the fence considering getting involved in NSIP, or maybe just considering purchasing a sheep for the first time with estimated breeding values, I just can't encourage you strongly enough, because the research clearly does show it makes a difference. So thanks so much for joining us this evening to all of our participants, and thank you to Tom and Becky, our presenters. Have a good evening.